Hi, first of all, thank you very much for being here at this very early time in the morning on a Saturday. We all know that hackers do not like going out or drinking alcohol or making the most of free bars. I am López, I'm a security analyst, and I'm here because in the last edition of Navaja Negra, some colleagues told me that they do not know what security analysts do, only working in correlation and monitorization or monitoring. So I decided to make the presentation to talk about what we do on a daily basis, and I decided to talk this presentation holidays in Costa del Sol because that was the name of my former company, Holiday Plan. And you often think, well, Costa of SOC, and there you can not really be lazy because we have a lot of work, and you're not in the sun either, because according to our regulation we usually work in windowless rooms. That is rule ISO 27000, based on 3 basic pillars: risk analysis, best practices, and continuous improvement of these regulations. The first part would be ISO 27000, which is a glossary of terms and introduction to the rule, then 27001, the certifiable part of this family of 27000, and then 27002, which is a reference guide to certify 27001. So 27001 includes 27001 and makes it certifiable. So a SOC is a physical facility where we keep the holy triad of integrity. We deal with monitoring, evaluating, and protecting different companies under our wing. And we have different departments that we can divide in 3 large blocks, even though sometimes tasks are a bit diffused between them. And we need to begin talking about the prevention guys, doing ethical hacking, audits, code, system service, infrastructures, and so on, and also doing intrusion tests if customers do not have their own red team or if they want to test their own red team. We also have the digital surveillance teams doing tracking, compilation analysis of the data they found on the internet and deep web. With them we can avoid problems of forgeries, wrong reputation, and we also deal with the monitoring and analysis of vulnerabilities from these types of analysis, so that proactively we can have incident detection that will help us carry out SOC plans. The second part will be detection. That's where we deal with 24/7 monitoring of all systems. We also detect all the threats, and we deal with the event correlation. That's where I live right now, so that you get an idea. And of course we also deal with the anti-incident response. Then the third part is correction, with all the mastering guys and the audit, and where we apply the correction that we have seen in the 2 former departments. We will also have a part of technical consultancy, where we can give these guys a hand to go through regulations such as 2701 or 001. And I created this presentation just to put this GIF in. I know that before that was on live, but this was my only target to be here, to put this GIF here. So a SIEM is a merger of 2 elements that until 2005 were treated separately. We merge SIM, which is a monitoring and storage of long-term logs, with SEM, which is a real-time correlation and presentation of events. And the SIEM was created in 2005 in report by the Gartner company, and this is the first time that in a single tool they merge these formerly separated tools. So what is inside a SIEM? There is a logical scheme based on 2 types of data: entry data, or input data, and output data. Those are the ones that we get through the SIEM, and we also have the context dates where we have vulnerability scanners, user information, asset information, and all the intelligence feeds that feed the logical scheme of the SIM inputs. And the SIM works its magic and returns some outputs, including reports and monitoring. So what was the magic applied by the SIM to all this data? Well, that magic is applied through 3 points, split in 3 logical parts, which are recollection, correlation, and long-term storage. So we begin with the collection part, and this layer imports all the logs to the SIM for it to correlate them. The SIM may have an active part regarding log collection if it does the consultations through data, or with SIFS or WUMI, or they correlate these logs through SFP or SCP. With this accumulated sending, we lose the 24/7 part in the real-time monitoring, where we can actually monitoring networks that are congested or areas that may have bad internet network coverage. And the NLCM passive part is on through syslog or agents, even though agents usually work a lot with syslog. And what is syslog? Syslog is a de facto standard, including standard 3164 and standardized in RFC 5424 and 5426, depending on the transport layer on which it operates. It usually works with ports 514 TCP and UDP or 60,514 or 61,514. And this is used in all our network devices and also in Unix and related systems. And even though in Windows it does not appear natively, we have many tools that can get these logs and send them out through syslog. So the syslog messages are quite simple. They have priority, heading, and text. Priority is split in 8 bits. The first 3 bits are this part here, which is severity, going from the debug to the kernel, or panic. And then we have the other 5 bits, which is facility. That is a part of the resource code where we can see the type of source sent out by the logs, and through this numerical code we can do some sort of differential treatment of the logs we're receiving. And then we have the header, where we include all the source data from the IP origin and the host name, as well as the timestamp. And then in the text part, we include the actual log sent by the source. Another way of getting the logs is through agents, which are small software parts that may be installed in the actual machine or in an intermediate machine that works as a log centralizer, and these send all the logs into it for the next collection layer. And these agents may be free or private, and they're usually geared towards the source, to the ELO source, in the sense that to the CM. And if we go back to Windows, we have different agents such as Snare and Corelog, even though we have others depending on the SIM technology. We may have outside or the curator connector. And these agents do very important tasks in collection, such as parsing, normalization, categorization, aggregation, and filtering. Even though if we are in an agentless environment, the origin source of the server can do that. The first stage is parsing. That is a log syntactic analysis, and this is like at school. When you get given a sentence, you need to say the subject, predicate, the direct or indirect object, and this is the same thing. You have a log and you need to determine whether it's from a firewall, may have the origin IP, destination IP, the port with where the traffic goes through, and if it's Windows, you may have the user, the validation DC, and so on. And this analysis is about splitting different fields through regular expressions. And it's very important for these to be simple enough to avoid overloads in our server. And well, we get to normalization, which is like the Esperanto of SIEM. Every source speaks a different language and talk to the actual correlator. We need them all to speak the same language. And that is a normalization of all the logs we receive. So there is a field standardization. Depending on the manufacturer, they picture them differently, and we need to paint them all in the same way where we have them in the SIEM. And here we may have certain custom fields, and depending on the different manufacturers, such as for firewalls, they may be applied in upper layers. And here we have data we need to collect to be able to correlate them. Are you bored? So you're yawning. But then we will go to the categorization stage that tags the logs, and here we apply tags to them, usually according to the actions done by these different logs. For example, if these are firewall events, we may have accepted traffic or denied traffic. If these are system actions or events, we may have correct or incorrect accesses, regardless of whether they come from Windows, Linux, or a VPN. What are these tags for? Well, to group per similar events. We can do a search per tagged events without needing to launch a query to the database so that we do not overload the system. The next stage here is the aggregation stage, that is not in all manufacturers. And this is there to optimize the storage and the license part that we'll see later how it works. So what is event aggregation about? Well, it's about getting a series of logs that are exactly the same, only differentiated by their timestamp. So we group from the first one to the last one, we count the number of logs that are exactly the same, and we group at times and correlate by the timestamp of the last event. And then, if you go down, depending on the manufacturer, you may see the first or intermediate timestamps, but that depends on the SIEM we're working with. Some SIEM do not use this aggregation because it doesn't make sense in their way of working. Splunk does not work with event aggregation, for example, or QRadar has a flow management that is optimized enough not to need this. And then we get to the filtering layer, or stage, which is a very important stage too. And here we're going to split the different elements of the events of the sources that are going to send us the logs. And we do not need at all the logs that the systems may spit out. And we need to do this filtering stage either directly from the source or from the agent that will send the logs, so that we do not overload the server that will receive them. Then we'll go to the correlation stage, which is where we live, where we apply intelligence. And I'm not going to deal with this for too long. I think this is cooler and I wanted to leave it for the end, but I could do a little spoiler and tell you that different functions we have here are receiving events, of course. We also establish temporary storage, where we generate also all the alerts and correlation events. We can also do different notifications, and that's the beginning of analysis and searches that we're going to make. I want to take into account that this is a temporary storage. It is done online, it is ephemeral, and that's where analysts work doing the consultations. They need to be quick. So if we have lots of data stored here, we lose this rapidity and the short-term perspective we need to work on a daily basis. We do not need to persuade them to confuse this with the temporary storage layer, which is the next one, which is devised to keep all the logs in long term. And this long-term storage layer is mainly geared towards compliance, which will determine the time for which we'll keep all these logs in our SIEM. That part will tell us which rotation time we need to have when we'll eliminate the old logs, and that layer also gives integrity to all the logs that are centralized in one single logical point, even though later on it can be at different physical points. That's where we get long-term reports, and even though it is not Not to that purpose, we can also do queries on these stored logs, even though I can say that it's a bit of a bugger when we need to look for them here, because the queries can be quite slow and it can take quite a bit of time to try to look for things in different loggers. Other functions in this layer, or directly in the CM, depending on the manufacturers, means that from here we can do an analysis of the different exploits and the vulnerabilities of the different exploits. Depending on the manufacturers, we may have tools such as Marzo or others. And we can actually launch this scanning from there, where we'll see a series of vulnerabilities we have within the system to prioritize them in the monitoring part. For example, let's say we have some sort of legacy dinosaur, or some tool that no one dares to touch, or some old system that no one dares to alter. So we can have a specific monitoring in these old systems and treat them with more care. And this can also be applied to SCADA systems or other sorts of industrial systems. And also from logs, analysts can paint the network topologies from all the logs we're seeing, so you kind of get the thread of where all the traffic is going through, and you can kind of depict it, not in a very reliable way, but you can get an idea of the network of the customer. And from here we can detect anomalies or abnormalities and help our clients regarding troubleshooting, because we are the ones reading the logs on a daily basis, much more than them, and we can usually help when they have some problem that they cannot see. And of course, these are the tools where we do all the incident management and the research done by analysts depending on each case. Another function, of course, is the user control, and in all companies this is quite important. And here we avoid brute force attacks, even though I'll talk about that later. And depending on the companies, they use a lot CMs for regulation, whether it's for SOX or 2701. And from CM we can also help compliance to extract data. We also have centralized reporting, executive and technical, depending on the solutions we have. And we can establish certain dashboards that depict all the information, not just in the short term, like an alert, but also in the long term, where we can see some other abnormalities. And we can have volume data to calculate DPS and other things like that. So once we know how the CM works, I'm going to briefly explain how the implementation stage of that CM works at a client. First of all, it's very important to have a good requirement taking stage, where we'll know about the real economic activity of companies and why our customer needs a CM. Is it due to regulation or for log storage? And which type of storage will they need? Well, all this information will be in the first stage. As you may imagine, it's not the same thing having a SIM installed in a hosting company as in an NGO, for example, or in a bank that is an online bank than a bank that has many ATMs in rural areas. Even though we install the same manufacturer in different cases, the end result will be totally different depending on the characteristics. And at this point we also need to know the real business, to know about the services we can give to customers. And it's very important to do good data collection. And in this data collection we also go into the compliance stage. We need to know exactly which regulation does the client need to have, because very often all these certification regulations do overlap. And sometimes may be a bit more complex to offer one or other solution depending on the company. Good practice at this point is to do certain guidelines, so that whenever they go through these audits, they may have a reference point to begin with documentation. It's also very important to know about the data sources that will be sent by logs, also about the devices we're going to monitor, mainly due to compatibility. Sometimes we need to do our own development or to get the development from the manufacturer to be able to get these logs that usually, in a normal way, we couldn't collect. And at this point, we can also offer added value if we know the company, and if they use their own tool with which all employees work, offering specific monitoring for this tool, for example. It's also very important to know whether this company has critical resources that need some sort of more specific protection, if they have medical data or religious data, or if they need some sort of specific storage, or if we go back to legacy systems, or the technology dinosaurs that live in many companies, or if we're talking about banking, because they have SWIFT systems and networks that need a bit more TLC. And we need to take money into account, software costs, the cost of the CM license, whether we're going to have it on an appliance, or whether we're going to need to install different agents for the network, whether we need to do specific tuning for the applications, and also see whether we need some sort of ticketing or similar tool. Regarding hardware, if we don't have a specific appliance, we might need to buy a compatible server. And we also need to take into account the storage part, as well as whether we need high availability and data center costs. And of course, we need to take into account that all the log movement may entail a higher cost in the bandwidth, either from the sources to the log centralizer, from the log centralizer to the actual server, or even traffic generated with backups by the database and so on. So once we have a picture of this, we need to get this logical architecture and transfer it directly to the physical layer. And to give an example, I have copied this image from the Alien Vault page because I thought it was quite cool, where we can see the different sources sent out by logs, the concentrator in the sensor, the server that deals with the correlation stage, and then long-term storage, which will be at the logger. Here we get to one of the most important elements in the system, which is dimensioning. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we need to take into account all the logs that are going to be speak out from systems, networks, and developments. To calculate all the events per second or gigabytes per day that they get to the log. And here we need to take into account that this stage is very important because we need to apply a growth capability to the CM that allows us to escalate it in a couple of years. For example, a CM is not a turnkey project where you get to the customer, you give the keys, and you forget about it. It is an alive project, it is a service. Began at a certain point and continues throughout a long time. So we need to have this scalability because the customer may want to add new sources, and we need to do changes that do not represent a drastic problem, so to say. And once we get to this point, we need to do the actual installation, the machine provisioning, the software installation, and the correlation stage. We might need to configure islows, look at the sources, specific audits, in correlation also have the assets, recognition deployment in storage. We need to determine retention, backup configuration, and so on. And once we get to this point, we need to do the three basic check banks. Are the logs being received correctly? Yes. Can the reports be exported? Yes. Are searches giving us back the data we can use? Well, here we apply intelligence to the use cases I'm going to mention at the end to tell you a few funny stories. And these leads to continuous improvements through reviews and improvements. And if the customer bought a new device, it will need to be integrated with new rules for new vulnerabilities. We need to take out all rules and so on. So CM is a live entity that we need to improve and treat on a daily basis. Regarding manufacturers, you may imagine the number of manufacturers in the market. It is sometimes complex to decide one or the other. Usually the solution is in money matters or compliance. And here's a picture with many examples we can choose from. But which CM can we choose? Well, here's Gartner again, an American company that does market research, 1 or 2 years. Every 1 or 2 years, basically. So, not just regarding CM, but they take lots of technologies and do a complex analysis, and they place them in a quadrant with 4 points. You have the leaders, the competitors, the visionaries that have a good product but are not yet leaders, and then the niche players, because either they're doing their own thing or because their product is not yet fitting the market and is not yet quite developed. So here we have the manufacturers. This year is quite relevant that these Splunk guys have advanced QRadar, which is the IBM solution, and RAT7 has repeated his place in visionaries and is actually alone. We can also see that solutions like FireEye have disappeared and that Securonics has gone from visionaries directly to leaders without going through competitors. And here's a summary of the manufacturers. This Gartner report costs about 1,000 euros, but if you do a couple of searches on Google, you may find it. Regarding Splunk, it has a strong integration environment and security for personal data. QRadar is good for flow management. And Logarithm is quite cool with graphic interfaces. And I'm not going to deal with this for too long because it's not too relevant. It depends on your customer needs, basically. But let's go to the cool part of the presentation, which is intelligence, the analysis, rules, and use cases. I've already said that the most important part of CMs is here. If a CM does not get intelligence applied, we have loads of logs and just a block of things that is useless. So how do we apply this intelligence? Through deep machine learning and through different sources that will be sent out by the logs. So we generate a series of correlation events, which are the starting points for incident management, and this is where analysts live, and I want to talk about our daily work. And what do we actually do? What does an analyst do on a daily basis? And I said, well, I know what we do. I'm going to copy paste my LinkedIn profile, and I realize that here it is not explained what we actually do on a daily basis at work. And LinkedIn eventually is like this because I'm not looking for work and the digital matters are not too interesting for me. So if you write to me through LinkedIn, it might take a few days to answer. But what does one need to be an analyst? Well, we need to have solid knowledge regarding systems, regarding networks, and regarding development. You do not need to be a great programmer, but you do need to know these parts quite well, because we read logs on a daily basis, and we need to know well the functioning of everything here, to know what we're seeing, even though then we might be reading RFCs for a long time, but just so that you get an idea. And please notice that we are the ones who fight hard with the bad guys on a daily basis, and we are the ones who get insulted, and very often our project and work can be a bit distressing. And what do we do to manage this stress that we might have at work, which sometimes is quite high? Well, in our team, we apply the so-called SOC. I come from systems. I was working there for a bit of time, and I dealt with loads of losers, and I had a plastic axe that I had at work, and there's nothing that makes me more angry than losers. They're horrible people that just make your life really difficult, and you just want to kill them directly. So I had a great guy, which is Eduardo, and I used to read his blog because I thought it was really funny. And at some point, Eduardo decided to apply with this guy they call the so-called BOFH Zen, which is taking life easily, taking a step back, breathing deeply twice, and not kill them there alive, because blood creates horrible stains. So getting this idea, apply it directly to the SOC ideas, because as I was saying, our work sometimes may be extremely stressing.
And we applied the SOC Zen. And what is that? Well, to take a step back, to breathe calmly a couple of times and then start reading these logs. Why do we have this stress? Well, because we have complex analysis that we don't know where they come from, often because of the SLAs, which can be a pain these days. And sometimes let's acknowledge that, because your boss is the one who's actually bearing on you. Brenda, my boss is up there, but it's nothing personal. I'm not referring to you, but often it is the boss who is being a pain, and I acknowledge that I was in one project, not in this one, he's a great guy, but I participated in a project in which the operations of the company was one thing and the customer operatives was a different one, and whatever you do, you were going to get it wrong, and you were going to be scolded either on one-sided or from both sides. So in order to work in a SOC, you need to be a calm person and to be patient, because often the bad guys insult us all the time. They always finish their messages by saying fuck you, and in general, what we need as analysts is to be people who do not panic at the first opportunity, because it doesn't make any sense to be overwhelmed so quickly. One of the big problems we have are the closings, and I think that has happened in all projects that I've been involved in. Each analyst has its own methodology, and each one defines how the closings can be like, and the positive thing about this is when events match with the triggers of the different warners, but they are not a threat for security. And when these false positives happen continually, then we apply an adjustment, or so that they stop sort of triggering. But the positives are those events that are matching a role but are not a threat. But the positives with impact, that also happens, that blood gets to the river, as we say in Spanish, and a positive without impact could be the scanning of the perimeter network, and a positive with impact that would require a more thorough investigation would be that perimeter scanner with access to port 22. And I'm not going to go into what important it is, this issue with ports with access from internet. And then the false negatives, when there is a threat that there's been no correlation event, or because the customer himself requests some kind of investigation. How do we get these mandates? Sometimes proactively from the customer, but usually these requests get to act through the correlation event that each manufacturer calls it in a different way. Some say alerts, alarms, offense, or crimes. And how do you get these correlation events? Well, at the high level would depend on the use cases. What's a use case? Use case is the definition of the rules at the high level, abstracting from the technologies that are in the data sources and in the SIM itself. With the use cases, what we do is we define the different threats that we want to monitor. Everything that we want to have parameterized, and once we are clear, it codifies depending on the SIEM, and we get to the rules. And so it is the CM that gives us correlation events based on the rules, and that depends on the technologies and the sources. And from here on, these correlation events generate a number of actions that can be automatic. For instance, sending of emails, SMS, reporting, updating of blacklists or updating of scripts, or the manual actions, which are the ones we will be in charge of where we start our investigations. The rules, these correlation events, get to us having seen a number of triggers in the alerts. And how do we get these alerts in the rules? Well, following a certain logic. For instance, it can be through flows, deviations, or some anomaly that we perceive directly. We can also have these when there's no event, for instance, when there is a warning saying this source has stopped sending events. We also have simple rules if it only matches with a correlation event, or complex rules if it matches with. So going back to the scanning, a simple one would be a simple scanning of the MAZ, and the complex one would be that scanning plus the correlation. The speaker apologizes for speaking so fast. The use cases we can divide by categories depending on whether they are internal attacks, external attacks, whether there is denial of service, etc. Between technologies, there are IPS, IDS, FW, correlation, or by the elements affected, or the risks, whether it affects integrity, confidentiality, or the availability. So we start with the use cases. I wanted to divide them as best as I can, and I think the top is always the follow-up of users. Within the top ones are the brute force attacks. In the case of Windows, in doing a lot of follow-up of the events of 4771 that come through the Kerberos side, or the 4625, and where we would do a follow-up of the possible brute force attacks or dictionary attacks, or the gentleman that's trying to use the neighbor's password. And going back to the troubleshooting I've mentioned earlier on, it will also lead us to solve problems in the different clients. Recently we had a brute force attack from Kerberos, and following the hints of the different events, we determined that what had happened there was a relog problem between the MDPs of the different DCs of this customer that was generating problems in the generation of Kerberos tickets, and it was generating many events of brute force. So this type of brute force, we have to see whether they're to do with BNPs or VIP users, or of course administrator systems of the system, or of the different machines that the customers have. So based on this type of cases, we can see lateral movements or an escalation of privileges, and we can see if somebody's trying to access resources they have no permission for. Through the user follow-up, very often we can see in a proactive way whether there is some kind of intrusion from outside. For instance, if there's a guy from marketing who is lifting the users of the group, that doesn't look very good, and you can check on that during the follow-up of users. And this type of use case, it's important here we have to establish some thresholds, and sometimes it's hard to do, to know where's the rule and to be able to establish the differences to start making the different investigations. Another of the big stars in use cases that I like a lot, and I have a colleague who hates them, are the compromised equipment. We can make detections of malware in many different ways. So we can detect malware in many ways, be it because of the alerts themselves of the antivirus, because we've seen the matching of a hash because of the behavior of the machine. If we have the memories that are completely collapsed, for instance, that could be a starting point for research to know if we have some type of malware installed in the machine. We can also see if there is malware because of the output flow events, for instance, in terms of communications with known or unknown machine. And we can also establish through monitoring measures to be able to discard whether it is malware or not. For instance, we're looking at the navigation of the proxy. We can know if they are in a licit web page or a not so legal web page, and if this reorganizing is leading to the downloading of malware or software that doesn't look too good. A few examples of this. An interesting research was a team that was connected to an internet IP through very weird ports because they're very unusual. At the beginning, we only looked at the IP, and I looked at the ports, and at the end we had 5 IPs, and at that time it was only that machine trying to establish that connection. Later on, quite quickly, it was not only that machine, but the other machines. There were a bunch of them in that network making requests towards those IPs, but not on weird reports, but on the 8433. And then quite quickly we saw thousands of events of connection through one of those IP through an Exchange server. We managed to isolate it on time, and it turned out that it was a gentleman that had taken a pen drive from home that was infected, and just by plugging it to the computer at work, he managed to infect the exchange of a company. You have to be careful about that with the users and what they can use in our internal networks. Another example of this type of malware, WannaCry. 2 years after the event, we're still talking about it. There are customers who, for whom we have had to change the traffic for the 4144 aside, and there are customers that we don't know which machines are doing this request because they do not keep the logs of the DNS of our customers. So there are also customers that not only know that they have legacy machines that have a WannaCry installed, but nobody dares touching, and you cannot remove it from there, because it is a very critical machine and a critical application, and they have the machine there with their WannaCry contained in a little class box, like a cyber horrors museum, really, that we have in many of our customers. If we're lucky, sometimes we are not malware analysts, okay? I have to make that clear, but sometimes we get a sample of a malware silly enough to be executed in a sample, and we can do a contention measure by knowing where they're trying to connect this malware. I'm taking too much time, I think. We also have to keep in mind when we look at these communications on the way out, or what we're trying to block, because if you have a pirate sky, you have to block the bad IPs, but not Microsoft, although some of you would like to do so. But you have to realize that you cannot block just indiscriminately, because you can make a mess. Something that I really enjoy is changes in the system. It's very important to have a specific monitoring in critical servers and systems. And how do you do that? With Sysmon or with similar tools, like Rex or things of the sort. And it is also very important to do a monitoring of the monitoring tool, because this is the first line of attack for the bad guys to try to make a mess. And they do that through services lists and using the driver 32. And if you have to monitor, if we're talking about Sysmund, the one up to 201. And why is it important to take care of Sysmund? Because there we'll see if there are changes of register. We can see if directly if there is somebody trying to execute a mimic and that's which is very trendy right now. You can monitor that from Sysmund. We can see if there are malicious libraries, if there is an escalation of privileges, and any other monitoring of logical activities at the system level. Of course, IPS, IDS, we have to have everything well monitored because they are an important starting point for the research or investigations that we're going to perform. They help us block, if we're talking about IPAs, the attacks of the type SQLI, things that we're familiar with, and malicious traffic. And they also help us in the detection of malware because they have a recognized knowledge, they have a number of signatures, and they generate for us correlation alerts. Each manufacturer does the recognition with machine learning, virtual sandboxes, flow analysis, behavior analysis, and so on. For us, it is an important starting point. Well, we know that IPSs we can get rid of quite easily, but if we apply the Pareto principle to security with a 20% of effort, you're going to remove 80% of the security problems, and we're going to find them through the IPSs and often through the firewalls. The network anomalies help us immensely. The scanners are very important because we can notice internal and external scannings and suspicious behavior. And if you remember this guy from the pen drive that I mentioned earlier on, everything started with an excessive traffic of firewall deny that was going out. And another interesting case, thanks to the firewalls, it was also outgoing traffic that was suspicious outgoing traffic that was being denied because it was a machine that was doing DNS requests to 3 or 4 internet IPs, and at the beginning we thought it was a malware that was trying to get in touch with some DNS malicious service to redirect a phishing machine or steal passwords. But looking a bit further into it, these were not DNS requests through VP, but they were going to the 53 by TCP, which are the ones that are used by DNS servers to make the zone transfer with other servers. So it was quite suspicious that a customer should be trying to go out through that port, and it was a guy who was trying to do data filtering of from the company outside. And you can imagine how that ended, and that was detected thanks to the good configuration of the firewalls. Another topic that could generate a complete talk is at the entry surface, and where the bad guys are always trying to access. But I won't talk about it because this is where I most often say, what a bastard, or he's trying to do this. So that's where you can see them thinking, and you realize that in effective security, we're always going to lose because we're always behind the bad guys. That's we shouldn't or we shouldn't be terrorized by this, but just be aware that that's how it is. Then in cases like what I've mentioned earlier on about the following or monitoring of users and the brute force attacks and access and abuse of privileges and other security problems that used to be sort of inside, and now we're checking to the cloud part. And of course DLPs, which to me are the worst, but it's also part of our job. There's no alternative but doing it. And these DLPs are leaks of information. They are usually used in tools such as McAfee, or where from a number of alerts you can see if they're trying to extract DNA or credit card numbers of account numbers, or if they're sending in plain text data from users or applications. We also have potential detections of data leak, for instance, if we see traffic in red store, or we see a VNP that's not the corporate one that's sending encrypted traffic outflow, or if there's somebody who's accessing the different storage servers in the cloud. If it says I'm going to try with the Dropbox, with the Drive, with the cloud, they're trying to do something. And I've left for the end this part, not because it's less important, but because for us it's quite relevant, everything that comes from the feeds. Do you remember what I've said earlier on about the context data that we receive? These are these data. They allow us to have an IP reputation or a web reputation. They allow us to categorize the filtering of webs into different proxies, and they also help us to deal with the file's reputation for malware detection, to know command and control, old command and control, and new command and control. And that's why it's important to have these feeds updated every day. And then there comes a point, and don't worry, I'm almost done. I've left here a list of all the data that I've quoted, and I would like to thank, because one must always be grateful. I wanted to thank Mr. Manuel Sayan. He's not here, but his son is here, who was the first person who trusted me. He always told me he was a very smart woman and I could make it, and I want to thank him for that. I also want to thank Jorge Luzao for all of these years of friendship and for how much time you used steering me in the right direction. And of course, I want to thank Mario Ruiz Fraile. I don't know where you're sitting, because for me it's a great pleasure to have you in my life, not only in my professional life, but in my personal life. You're a great person, and there isn't time in the world to thank you for everything you've done for me, and to all of you. But wait, I also wanted to thank the organizers that have included me in the web page, and because my mother has seen it and she is over the moon about it. So only for that it was worthwhile the stress of preparing this presentation, and to all of you for coming to listen. Thank you very much. We have time for just one very brief question. Well, if you want to get in touch with me, there's a very quick question over there on that microphone. It's a difficult question, actually. It was a great talk. Thank you. You've said that you have serious stressful situations, but you are in a company, in an external company to the one you're providing the service to. How do you do it to be so committed with your customers, since you actually work for a company outside? Well, I can assure you it can be quite stressful. But how do you manage for your workers to feel close to the customer they're working to? but it is our job. We get paid to get nervous because we are more aware than our customers of what's going on. So we are the ones who proactively get nervous when we see what's going on. But it is part of the job. There's nothing. It's worse. I don't know. Surgeons have a harder time, I'm sure.
Para Marta.